Hello, everyone. So in the next 40 minutes, what we're going to do is to look at the exciting new features in IntelliJ, how you can be more predictive with Spring Boot. I'm guessing that all of you have tried Spring Boot or had a look to it. And when you did that, you probably have seen this website, start.spring.io, which is a service to generate ready-to-use projects. So basically, when you go to this site, on the left, you have some information about the project you want to generate. Maven coordinates or project coordinates, because you can use Maven or Gradle if you want to. Some information about the Java versions you want to use, the language you want to use if you want to develop in Java or Groovy, the Spring Boot versions you want to use, in case you go and just use the greatest and latest or the nightly build. That's for the left. And on the right, you have all kinds of technologies you may choose. And what Spring Boot is going to do is, based on the presence of those libraries in your class path, it will try to auto-configure things for you. So for instance, if you want to build a web application and you want to use a Timeleaf as a template engine, then you can select those two, and you can also select others. You can, for instance, also say you want a GPA backend using H2. And once you're done with that, you can generate a project, and that will generate a zip file you can basically open in your IDE. So that's nice, but it would be even better if you could do all that right from IntelliJ. And that's this new Spring Initializer sanction here. So if you click New Project, Spring Initializer, you'll basically get the same features right from IDE, right from IntelliJ IDEA. So this is the SDK you want to choose, and the site, that's the same site as we saw before. And you can see the same information. I'm going to choose Java 8, for instance, and keep Maven for now. And what we're going to do to showcase the features in IntelliJ, we're going to build a web app, and we're going to create very quickly an entity, a GP entity. And we are going to create a repository for that, and we're going to use H2 as the data store. We're also going to secure this web app, and we're also going to expose the repository as a REST endpoint. And finally, what we're going to do is we're going to choose also this library called the actuator. And what it provides is it provides all kinds of non-functional features, all kinds of services that you have to do over and over again when you start a new application. So the idea, instead of do those over and over again, have them provided to you. So these are the technologies I want to use today. And I'm going to say I want to create a project named demo IntelliJ IDE and have that into that directory, and click finish. So I'm have my new project right from the IDE. The Maven project has been detected, so I'm going to add that. And I have a fully functional project I can use right away. So if you know about Spring Boot, you know that the way to start a boot application is is very simple. It's like right-click main, and your application will start, regardless of the fact it's a web application or not, because we provide an embedded container for you if you decide to build a web app. So I'm going to create quickly the entity I was talking about earlier, and I'm going to create a speaker. And in order not to write the class in front of you, I'm going to use an IntelliJ IDEA feature called file template, which basically allows me to create a class from a pre-populated template. So you can see that the speaker is a regular GP entity with an ID, first name, last name, a Twitter account, reference, and a bio. I'm going also to create a speaker repository, and the same thing. And the speaker repository is using Springdata and Springdata GPA in this case, even though you see no import whatsoever related to GPA. So it's a regular create repository on a speaker. The primary key is long. If you know about Springdata, you know that you can define methods on the repository interface, and Springdata will create a proxy for you and will infer the proper queries based on the method name. So basically, this is going to create a search method on the Twitter field, and it will return a single speaker. And the same thing here, returning a collection of speakers having the specified last name. You can also see that it has some Springdata repository annotations on it, which in this case is simply used to customize the way the search method is going to be exposed. We are going to see that in a minute. And these are to bind the URI attribute to the actual search parameter. So I want to have some speaker in my store. As you see, I'm going to use H2. So to do that, I'm going to use an Hibernate feature. If you create a file named import.sql at the root of the class path, and Hibernate is going to generate the schema. If it finds such file, it will basically process it. And to fill it, I'm going to use another feature called Live Template, where you can basically map any shortcut to whatever you want. This is it. I have an app. So I'm going to run it. As you can see, as from IntelliJ IDEA 14.1, the editor has detected that this main class is a Spring Boot application, so it offers a way to start it as a Spring Boot application, as the icon states here. So let's do that. Okay, so I have an application which is starting now. It's doing some stuff. Okay, so I need to log into my app. The reason why I need to log into my app is because I've added the security starter in the list in the wizard previously. So the decision that Boot is going to take, if you don't have any special configuration or any special customizations to your app, is to secure everything with basic authentication. And it's also going to create a user so that you can at least log in to your application. And the default username is user. And there's no default password, because if we do that and we write a default password in our documentation, and someone happens to forget about it, then it's a security hole, and it can be dangerous. So what we do is, whenever we start the app, we generate a unique password for that instance. So if we restart the app again, the password will change. So I'm going to copy that, paste it here, and then I can log into my app. So I can see that the repository, the speaker repository, has been exposed. And I can see that the speakers I've created through that import.sql file have been processed and can be seen as a RESTful resource. I can also navigate to search methods through that link. And I can see the two search methods that have been exposed, so by Twitter and find my last name. So I can also search by Twitter and search for Trisha and have it here. I told you also about the actuator, and what the actuator provides is certain endpoints like the info endpoints, which give some information about your app, or a earth endpoint that checks if your app is up and running. I can see that the H2 database is up, and some information about disk space. I can look for some metrics, etc., etc. Okay, so that was a Spring Boot app. It took 10 minutes to build it from the ground up, even though I cheated a bit with the templates, but you get the idea. So the first thing which is really annoying about this application is every time it starts, it requires you to look into the logs to find out about the default password. So of course, in a regular app, what you would do is create a proper security configuration. We're not going to do that. So one thing about the Spring Boot auto configuration mechanism is when you want to use the auto configuration, and so you want to keep what the auto configuration does, but you want to slightly customize it. Each auto configuration might expose a set of configuration keys. And by specifying some customization using those keys, you can slightly change the way the auto configuration works. So the first thing I want to do is I want to specify a password instead of having an auto-generated one. So I need to know the key. I need to know which key maps to that feature. And first I need to know if that feature exists. So what I'm going to do is try to type pass and see what happens. And what you get in IntelliJ IDEA 14.1 is this content assist for configuration keys. You can see that the first entry here is a security.user.password, and you have some documentation saying it's the password for the default username. You also have the type here. So let's fix it to change me. So instead of having this auto-configured password, auto-generated password, sorry, you have one you fix yourself. Then I want to change the realm for whatever reason. And if I type realm, then I will get the default value. You may have noticed that when I had to log in, that pop-up said Spring. So I want to do something. I want to say hello and choose a random value. And Spring Boot has this support for the random prefix, which is a special prefix you can use in application of properties. So it knows about it and it auto-completes things for you. Then I want to specify the roles that the user will have, and it's very important that this user has the admin role because that's the role that's required to access the actuator endpoint, so the info earth metrics endpoint I just show you. So let's type role. And I can see here that I have security user.role, which is a list. And in that case, since it's a list, IntelliJ knows about it. And let's say I'm going to say user for this one, and I'm going to type whatever, something that's not a valid number. And or I can also type 0. Of course, that won't work because it's the same key. And type admin. So remember this info endpoint I was talking about? There is a way to set some data into the JSON output, and the way it works, if you look at the Spring Boot documentation, is you need to set a key whose prefix is info. So info.anything will be set as a value to that JSON output. So if I type info, then I can see it's a map and have some documentation about it. So let's say I'm going to type some description. You can see that the description key here is displayed differently so that you know it's the key of a map. And let's say I want to create a property on my own, which is displayed as being unknown. Okay. And let's say I want to show that as a value. So I get this auto-completion as well for configuration keys you may create yourself. And you can see the default value in this case. Well, the actual value in this case. Okay. Another map special handling that IntelliJ IDEA support is the logging level feature. So it's a way in Spring Boot to configure the logging regardless of the logging library that you use. So whether you use log4j, logback, or something else, you can specify some levels here, and we will configure that according to the logging infrastructure that you have at runtime. And the tool knows about it, so it offers you again nice auto-completion for the package in this case and the value. All right. So let's start this application again with all those customizations and see what happens. So the first thing that we should see is some additional information in the logs, and this is the auto configuration report from this package actually. Since I switched that package to debug. So let's say I have to log in again. So it's user change. Okay, change me. And you can also see here that the realm says hello3, which is one of the random value between 0 and 5. If I go to the info endpoint, I can see the values that I've set. Okay. And I still have a warning into my configuration file. And this warning, and I could also type some crap here and have an error instead. And it would be nice if IntelliJ IDEA could actually validate that file on build. So there's a way to do that. The first thing you have to do is you have to make sure that under the build, execution deployment, and compiler section, there is a validation subsection and a validate on build that you have to enable for it to work. And what we're interested in this case is the Spring model, but I'll just keep the other ones for now. Once you make sure that the feature is enabled in your instance, you have to go to project structure, facets, create a new Spring facet for your module, basically, and then add an additional property file, which is the file that we are currently editing. So this one. Okay. So if I do that and I build now, I can see that the warning has been integrated into the main make window, and I can also try to start the application, and it won't start because something is wrong in my configuration. But we haven't really fixed the warning, did we? And what I want to show you now is, you may wonder by now how IntelliJ IDEA is actually building that list. So when you type something, how does it know about all those keys? And one thing which is really, really nice to what we built is it's actually an open infrastructure, something you can use in your own project, something you can use for your own keys, and it's really easy to do. I'm going to show you that in a minute. What happens really is Spring Boot, as of version 1.2, generates metadata for each configuration keys that it defines. And it generates that with a standard format, a JSON format. And it generates a file in a specific location. And what IntelliJ IDEA does is looking for that file for each jar in your project, and basically build a repository of configuration keys. There's two ways to do it. There is a manual way for corner cases. That's what I'm going to show you now, even though that's not what you're supposed to do. You should aim at the automated solution, but I want to show you the manual one first. So you have an intention here. So if you ask the tool what you can do, it offers you a way to define the configuration key. And to do that, again, Spring Boot has defined that standardization is you may place a file called additional configuration, Spring configuration metadata.json into the meta-inf directory. And we will look that up and use those as additional read manual metadata. So since the file does not exist for this project, IntelliJ IDEA asks me if I want to create it. And it also asks me where I want to create it. And it will basically generate a sample entry for me. So we already said that the counter, it's probably an integer, right? It's not a string. So I can make that a string. And I can also have a default value, which is different from 42. I could also, let's say, create a different property. of type string this time, and some, let's say, some very small description. You may have noticed by now that there is a banner on the top telling you, hey, you should rerun the annotation processor to update the metadata. So the way it works is we've implemented an annotation processor that runs as part of the build, and when it detects either the additional metadata file or some annotated class, I'm going to show you that in a minute, it will generate a metadata file and place it at the standard location. So in order to add that to your project, it's very simple. You only need to add one dependency, which is I'm going to do now. And it's called Spring Boot Configuration Processor. And since it's an annotation processor, it runs as part of your build, really. You don't need to expose that to your project at all. It's really something that's local to the project, used by the build process of your project, and not exposed as a library that's required to use your app. Okay, so I did create an additional key. And I can see that the file has been generated here. So if I go back and type foo.bar, I can find my additional description here. But, well, you need to manually add those metadata by hand. You may also change your code, and you forget to change the metadata. So it's really a bit painful. So what I want to show you is how you can use that feature and have the metadata generated for you from the code. So to do that, I'm going to create a simple service, an hello service. I'm going to flag that as a service, and use the command line runner interface from Spring Boot. What's basically going to happen is when the application will start, this particular method will be called. So I want to say hello, but I want to say hello in a customized way. So let's say I have a hello properties class, and let's create that class. It basically has a prefix. Let's say it's hello. And it has a target, so really the thing to which you want to say hello to. Let's use that within our hello service. I'm going to inject the hello properties, which, if you follow, can't work because hello properties is not annotated by any means. So we'll come back to that in a minute. And let's say I'm going to do prefix, a space, and the target. Simple. There's a few things that's missing. The first thing is we want to tell Spring Boot that this class is actually to be mapped by configuration keys defined in your configuration. So in a command line switch, in a system property, or in an entry in this file, the application properties file. So I'm going to add an annotation from Spring Boot called configuration properties with a prefix. And as you may have found out by now, this particular configuration key is hello.prefix, and this one is hello.target. That doesn't mean that this configuration properties is processed by any means. There is an extra annotations to use to do that. And that's also going to make sure that this particular class is a Spring Bean, which makes sure that the auto wiring I've used here will work. There's no target being defined, and I want to make sure it's mandatory to define one. So I'm going to add a constraint to that property. And let's start my app again. And you can see that the warning is gone now. And that should fail. And that fails because target is not set. So let's go back to my file. And you can see that it's already there. So the thing that the annotation processor is looking at is this configuration properties annotation. So whenever you put that on the class in your project, the annotation processor will detect it's a target for configuration keys, and it will generate the relevant metadata. So you've seen that I had to create a getter and a setter in order to inject the value. So if you have a field, for instance, without a setter, Spring Boot won't be able to inject the value, so it won't generate metadata for that field either. You can also see that the default value has been found automatically. So let's say world. And let's try again. Okay, and I can see that I have my message here. You can also add documentation in a certain place so that the annotation processor can pick that up. The reason why we do that versus looking at the Java doc on your setter is you may want to provide a very dedicated message to the configuration keys without impacting the way your code is built. So without having to change the way the setter is called. Oops. So if I do that again, sorry, then I get the documentation for my field. And you can see that the hello target is gone now, because since you have defined it already in this particular configuration, it will be filtered out automatically by IntelliJ. So that's for the configuration key and the content assistant support that IntelliJ IDEA provides. One thing also that, and we saw that at the early beginning, IntelliJ IDEA support is dedicated run configuration for Spring Boot applications. So let's see that now. So you can see it's quite similar to a regular main class configuration panel, but there are more data here and dedicated options. I can hide a banner, and I can also change per run configuration some settings. And I get also content assistance in here. So let's say that for this particular instance, I want to change the password. Okay, and let's run this application again. And if I go here, I have to log in again. You see that the value has changed, hopefully. And that's changed me too. And we go. So these are really a good way for you to, if you have multiple ways of starting a particular Spring Boot application, and if you want to change some settings, you can do so directly here and have multiple run configuration for the same app with slightly different settings. Another thing that IntelliJ IDEA knows about is profiles. So profiles is not something that's new. It's there since Spring Framework 3.2. And the way it works is you can start an application by specifying a set of profile names, actually. And when those names are present, beans that are flagged as being defined for a certain profile will be enabled. Spring Boot takes that support a bit further and allows you to create configuration file with the name of the profile in it. So let's say that I want to create a dev profile, and the first thing I want to do is I want to disable authentication completely. And in this case, there is a key, which is this one, which is on by default, and I'm going to switch that off. I would like also to show you an extra bean definition. And I'm going to use the live template again. And what we're going to do when the dev profile is enabled is we're going to expose the H2 console so that you can actually log in through your web application to look at the state of the database. It's useful in development. So since I want to use H2, I need to remove the scope here so that I can access the H2 console class. And I have this live template with a parameter called H2 console. And when I do that, the only thing I have to do is give the name of the profile. And this register an extra servlet on the console path. So let's start this application again without specifying any profile, just to prove that it's not doing something it shouldn't. And in an incognito window, I have to log in again, and that's changed me too. And if I go on console, it doesn't work. There is no mapping for that. So let's go back to the run configuration here, and let's duplicate this run configuration and call it dev. And then here I can basically say that I want to activate the dev profile. Let's run this up and open a new incognito window. So your application is not secure anymore, and I can go to the console and actually look at my speaker table. But IntelliJ IDEA goes a bit further than that, and it also knows about a dev profile value in certain places. So if you want to rename this value here, so let's say you want to call that dev2 for whatever reason, then it will find out that in your project there is already a file respecting that convention, a file for the dev profile. And it will suggest you to rename that file as well, since you changed the name of that profile. Okay, I have a few more things I want to show you, which is called a Smart Content Assist. So that's basically the ability of IntelliJ IDEA to know about certain types and to offer smart auto-completion of either the key or the value. So for instance, you also notice that we have a deprecated support. So if you have a key and you want to no longer to support it, but of course you still need to support it from quite some time, then you can flag that as deprecated and it will be shown with another strike. Let's customize that key. And in this case, it's in the class set. I can basically change I can have a suggestion for the class set value. Can also do that with content types. So in this case, the default content type of timely views. Whatever the value, I don't know, CSV, whatever. But we also have smart auto-completion for values, potential values for a key. So you probably used Hibernate in the past, and you know that there is this setting that allows you to create or update the database on startup, or maybe not do anything. You also notice that I didn't have to do anything. The reason why I didn't have to customize anything is because when Spring Boot tried to auto-configure the data source, it first looked at the context. There was no data source defined. I didn't define anything. Then it started looking at the class path and found that there was one embedded database. So since nothing was defined, it created a database in memory for me with a default name, which is testDB. You saw that in the console. And since it's a database in memory, so it's going to be recreated at every run, that auto-configuration piece is actually also enabling the the generation of the schema automatically, so that you get what you basically expect without specifying anything. So if I type Hibernate here, I can see that I can provide some values for it, and I get auto-completion for those. I can also navigate to the actual target of a key. So for instance, exactly the same way as you do when you want to browse through a method call, method invocation. So if I do this, I'm basically going into the security properties of Spring Boot and the set password, so I can see what happens when I set that key. I also have a quick documentation assist for the key with the default value, the description, and the type. All right, so that's what I wanted to show you today. The upcoming support, well, it's released now. It's IntelliJ 14.1 final, by the way. So if you download that version right away, you get all those features right now. And let's see if there is, I'm sure there are tons of questions I could hopefully answer. So let's see about that. Thank you.
Stéphane, hello. This is Rob.
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. So there's one question. I'm hopping in here. So I'm not sure if you answered this already. It says, don't we need to add config classes to Spring Facet?
Well, I didn't add it because it was not the goal here, but you don't have to. If you add it, then you get additional content assist, but that's regular Spring support, not Spring Boot related. So if you add that application, that demo application class, and you define beans in them, then IntelliJ IDEA knows about them and can see when you try to inject a bean where it's coming from and things like that. But in the case of what I wanted to demo, it's not mandatory.
Okay, I think you answered this one. Are you going to put code at GitHub?
Yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to post this exact app so that you can play with it right after the webinar.
Okay, there's another question here. How Grails fits the Spring ecosystem?
Okay. Well, if you look at Grails, actually Grails 3.0 was released today, and it's a rewrite on top of Spring Boot. So if you use Grails 3, it basically generates, or it basically uses Spring Boot behind the scenes, which means that your Grails 3 app is actually a Spring Boot app. So it's very central in the way Boot is used.
Okay. Okay, the questions are coming in now here. Let's see.
I can see one regarding Springloaded. I can maybe answer right away. So
Sure.
The question is, how can we add Springloaded in IntelliJ by VM parameters? So the answer is yes. You basically need to download Springloaded. It's a single jar. Put that jar on somewhere on your disk, and in the run configuration there is 2 flags which are defined on the Springloaded README. You define them as VM options, and Springloaded will start at the same time as you have.
Okay, the next question, does the community version provide Spring Boot integration?
As far as I know, all the Spring support is related to the Ultimate version, so the Spring Boot version goes with it. But I guess someone from JetBrains is more suited to answer that. I'm actually using the Ultimate version. I don't think that the free versions has that feature.
Okay, how would I add some username password authentication backed by, example, a database table or a custom user detail service?
Okay, so you can still see my screen, right? At
yes,
this point.
Correct.
All right, okay, great. So you would do something like this. You would create a security config, global. Okay, let me put that down. So you would basically give your opinion to Spring Boot. You would say, I don't want Spring Boot to auto-configure the security for me. I want to define something explicitly. And what happens is when you do that, you only change that part of the auto configuration. So if I do something very simple, of course you can do more stuff more complicated, but there is in memory, there is also JDBC authentication here. So basically the simple fact of defining that class Spring Boot will detect it and will back off the auto configuration part that's dealing with this because you define something yourself. So we can actually try while you're searching for a different questions. So let's say user two roles user admin. Okay, let's try that. So if I'm starting this up, because the dev one has the authentication disabled completely, so I should have user toto2 somehow. And here you go. So it does not fully answer the question because it's in memory, but you basically get the full power of Spring Security. So you can, if you want a database-backed authentication, you can do so through the same mechanism.
Okay, here's another question. Can we configure the web server bundled with Spring Boot with custom configuration?
I didn't get that.
Let's see here. Maybe I read it wrong. It says, yeah, we can configure the web server bundled with Spring Boot with custom configuration.
Oh, okay, that one. Okay, so there is basically two things you can do. When you add the web starter, so the web technology in the wizard, you get Tomcat by default. So you can decide to switch to something completely different. So you can use Jetty or you can use Undertow if you want. It's just replacing dependencies. And you can also configure things. So if you want to know what you can do, you just type server dot, and you get all the configuration of the embedded container. There is some Tomcat specific settings that you will find under server.tomcat, and you can find, I believe, Undertow has some support too. I don't think Jetty has. No, it doesn't. So here are all the keys that you can define. That will slightly change the way the Tomcat or the embedded container will start. You can also deploy a Spring Boot app as a regular WAR file. If I go back to this start.spring.io quickly, it's the same thing within IntelliJ IDEA, by the way. You can decide to build a WAR file instead of a jar file, and that will just build a regular WAR file that you can deploy in any Servlet 3 container.
Could I use H2 console with other databases?
No. So the H2 console is something very specific that H2 provides, and it's really dedicated to H2. I don't think that you could use that with a different database. Although I might be wrong, but I would be surprised if that was the case.
One might be a little bit of a longer answer, but we've had this question a couple times. Can you tell us a bit about the Spring Boot and Spring roadmaps?
Spring Boot and what?
Spring roadmaps.
Oh, sure. So Spring Boot 1.2.3 was released today, actually. And we are currently working on the 1.3 release, which will be out around September this year. So what we're going to do, we have a set of themes that we want to implement. We want to implement caching auto-configuration. So basically the ability to auto-detect a caching library and provide a cache manager and cache statistics, expose cache statistics in the actuator. We want to also improve the build tools that you use with Boot. Namely, Gradle has been improved with the use of the dependency plugin, which allows you to use a Maven BOM the same way in Maven. So basically providing a reference to a POM and have the dependency management being applied to your project. We want also to update the plugin so that it's easier for you to run integration tests. So basically, this a similar feature to Cargo, where you can start a Spring Boot app, run the integration tests, and then stop the application, regardless of the fact that the test has succeed or not. And there is also plenty of other areas where we want to improve the auto configuration, provide more options. So that's what we're busy doing at this point.
Okay, excellent. So maybe this is one of the last ones here. So why don't you use Gradle? Is there some problem in Gradle support and IDEA, or maybe Gradle has some disadvantages compared to Maven?
No, I just use Maven because I'm quite used to it. I'm actually in the PMC, so Maven is like something I've been using for more than 10 years. Gradle is just fine. So you can see you can use that in the result, and you'll get the same experience. You can do that actually right away. So you can do create a new project. Spring Initializer, you can say, I want a Gradle project instead. Can use all the same options, have a web security, REST, whatever, GPA, actuator, H2. Demo Gradle, and create that as a new window. So you get the same user experience, IntelliJ IDEA detecting that a Gradle project needs to be configured for you. And then it will do well, you'll get the usual Gradle support within IntelliJ IDEA. As far as boot is concerned, we have build plugins for both. So we have a build plugin for Maven and a build plugin for Gradle. And we try as much as we can to have the same features between the two. I was mentioning the dependency plugin in Gradle, which allows you to use a Maven POM right from your Gradle script. This is something that's not supported out of the box, that Gradle does not support. And we felt that it was really annoying, because then you have to define versions, whereas you could simply use proper dependency management. So we actually build the plugin ourselves, and that's what we use now as from Spring Boot 1.3. So you can see that, as you can guess, I'm not using Gradle much, so it's downloading a few things here, but it's a perfectly valid project.
Thank you, Stéphane. A couple links here while we wrap up. Again, Stéphane, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everybody for joining us. And it was a pleasure having you. We look forward to having you visit us again.